Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of r/malicious compliance. Manager kept forgetting my break. I worked in a cafeteria on campus at my university. It was wonderful because I could take shifts around lectures and didn't lose time traveling. The manager used to sit in her office on the phone or just disappear for long periods of time. I didn't mind because I like my other co-workers and she left us alone to do our thing. I always volunteered to do the closing shift because the owner let me take home all the leftover food. It basically kept me and my housemates alive and we were very grateful. The problem was, on a 5-hour or longer shift, you had to take a 30-minute break. I'd always ask when mine was, but she'd always say later, "We're too busy." I'd usually end up just working the whole 5 hours. I didn't mind until I realized she was only paying me for 4.5 hours. I asked her about it and she said if I didn't take my breaks that wasn't her problem. Cue malicious compliance. My next closing shift was 4.5 hours of opening hours and finished 30 minutes after closing. Everyone else went at 7 and I stayed back by myself to clean everything in 30 minutes. It was a big job, but I had it down pat. The entire shift I kept asking her if I could take my break and she kept saying no. So, at 7, I took my apron off and walked out, saying I'll be taking my break now since we were too busy before. I sat in the cafeteria and watched her clean that entire place. It took her well over an hour. The next day she had a break schedule up. Next story. When I took the SAT in the early 80s, they required that we took an extra third part to test their future questions. The SAT back then, and maybe now, had 2 parts, English and math. When we finished they told us that we had to stay and take a third part, which were questions that they were considering for future tests. The proctor said that we would see our score, but it wouldn't be sent to colleges. F that. I paid to take your goddamn test and I am not about to do your work for you for free. I asked what would happen if we left it blank. I was told that our entire test would be invalidated. They may have been bullshitting, but I was not taking that chance. Okay, fine, I'll take it. I spent about half a minute filling in random bubbles and then put my head down and took a nap on the desk. When my scores came back it was like 85th percentile in English, 96th percentile in math and something like 21st percentile in that stupid extra test. How did 20% of the population do worse than I did? Next story. Stop communicating? Fine. I've been working as an underwriter for several years. I evaluate loans that are submitted through the queue. I also forward some loan applications, apps, to senior underwriters should applicants apply for a higher amount. Part of our expectations as underwriters is to decide on at least 3 apps each hour. If we do not meet this request, then we are put on warnings and are subject to being fired. I work alone with another underwriter on Sundays. He let me know that he was very low on his decisions per hour, and in the spirit of cooperation, and because my numbers are always well above that due to experience, I asked him how many apps he'd like to work out of the main queue, and it is first come first served for apps. At first he was appreciative of the help and would let me know how much he was going to do and I'd be sure to leave the apps for them. A month ago he met me and told me to stop asking him how many apps he was going to do that day as he was feeling micromanaged. I let him know that I was just trying to help him meet his numbers and that I was only asking to make sure I didn't get in the way. He told me to stop communicating with him and to just work the queue. I made sure to document the conversation should there be any backlash for the upcoming malicious compliance. From that day on, I just used my experience to my advantage and claimed as many apps as I could. On a normal Sunday there is around 150 apps. Under our arrangement before, I did half of them and left the other 75-ish for him. The queues and how intense the applications can vary, which is why I'd always communicate with him. After that, I did as many apps as I felt I could while still being accurate, as that is another thing we are judged on. For the last 3 Sundays the amount of apps the other underwriter did has gone down to around 20 apps each Sunday due to how fast and accurately I was able to get through the rest of the queue. I also stopped answering his questions in the chats and said that I was too busy working to answer his questions. He is now on a verbal warning and he is too prideful to tell me he was wrong or apologize, so I'm keeping course. I was able to change shifts and no longer work Sundays due to how good my numbers look, so I will no longer have to work with him alone on Sunday. I still refuse to answer his questions the other days of the week we work. I have not been approached by my management for my malicious compliance and have only been praised on my work thus far. Next story. If you say I'm not allowed to touch it, I won't. Not even if you say I should. I work at an electronics manufacturing company as a quality inspector. There are some products that need to be X-rayed and ICT'd in circuit test. We have both inline X-ray and ICT machines. The X-ray just works, but the ICT test program sometimes errors out. Usually, 99% of times, there is an error message, which just needs to be dismissed and the machine will continue testing. There are a few occasions when the test program needs to be restarted, in which case, we need to call the technician. The ICT stopped and I went there to check it out. It was not the usual error message, so I left it to tell my supervisor, the line leader, to call the technician. But, before I could do so, the technician arrived and accused me of closing the test program. I argued with him that I absolutely did not close it and that I was expecting the usual error message. He didn't take it and told me and my supervisor that we are, under no circumstances, allowed to touch the inline ICT. The malicious compliance. He didn't leave for 5 minutes when the ICT stopped again. It was the usual error message. I told the line leader to call the technician while I started downtime in the ODS, online downtime system. He did and he was told to just dismiss the error message because he was having lunch. My supervisor told him that he said that we are not allowed to touch machine under any circumstances. He was not having it, but we didn't care. If we're not allowed to touch it, we won't. After he finished lunch, he came there, dismissed the error message and started to argue with us. We said, but you told us we're not allowed to touch it, so we didn't. The fallout. In the end, he had to close down a 30-something minute downtime for what would have otherwise taken a few seconds. From then on, we are allowed to dismiss the error message, but only that we, of course, are not having it. We are not allowed to touch the ICT under any circumstances after all. Next story. My manager told me to take my break, so I did. I currently work at a Mexican chain in Australia. A few months back, we had this really bad manager who was doing a placement at our store while her store was undergoing repairs from flooding. She's the type of person who looks down on you because you're a worker and she's a manager. When I first started, I did an opening shift with her. I hadn't done one before, and I kept asking questions which she kept getting annoyed at and kept acting like I should know what I was doing and kept leaving me alone. She belittled me for not getting the meats out on time, aka 2 minutes past opening. She yelled at me because I didn't put coriander in our salsa when we were out of coriander. She yelled at me for putting too many beans on one burrito despite me following the build guide. She had been yelling at me and treating me really badly all day to the point I'd almost walked out and left her, but I kept my cool. Now I'd like to add, it's well known in the store that I have hip dysplasia, which in turn really hurts my lower back, so I have to sit down for a few minutes and rest it. Afterwards I'm usually fine. It's on my file, and the store manager has always been fine with it as long as it's not during a rush. That day was an especially bad day, so after around 5 hours on my feet, my back was really starting to ache, so I asked her if I could sit down for a few minutes to rest as the busy period had passed. Manager, why? Can't you just work? Me, I have hip dysplasia, so I just need to sit for 5 minutes. Store manager has always been fine with it. Manager, that doesn't even make any sense. No, you can't sit down. Me, I'm in a lot of pain, all I need is 5 minutes. I'll come back out if it gets busy. Manager, no, I don't pay you to sit down. Go take your break instead, 30 minutes, and don't come back until you're done complaining. So, I made myself some lunch and sat down in our dining room. About 5 minutes later, the busiest rush of a lifetime came through the door. We were still a reasonably new store and the hype was high, so I'm talking a line going out the door and it kept growing. My manager's face turned white as she started serving people who are ordering large amounts of food per person. She gave me these looks of distress, asking for my help with her eyes. Cue my malicious compliance. I sat back on my phone, looking as relaxed as humanly possible, taking very big and dramatic mouthfuls of my food while watching YouTube very loudly. I had customers ask me if I could hop back behind the counter, but I simply said I'm sorry. My manager sent me on my break and said not to come back until I'm done complaining about my back problems, and I'm still very sore. She stares daggers at me, but I just kept eating my lunch. Customers start getting angry at her for not moving fast enough to keep up with the demand, but she knows she can't blame me because of what she said earlier, so she just keeps apologizing. She was running around the back to get salads from the fridge, swapping meats around, getting new sauces, basically things that a second employee is meant to be there to help with, all while customers kept complaining. I just sat and watched, smirking as she clearly regretted not just letting me sit down for 5 minutes, otherwise I would have been there to help. When the rush finally ended about 40 minutes later, I clocked back on and said, "Thanks for the extended break. My back feels so much better now." Which incited many glares in my direction. I didn't have to serve even one of the probably 40 to 50 customers that came through the door. She treated me better after that and is now always her kindest self when she's around me, so I call that a win. Luckily, her store was repaired and she went back there. People said I was in butthole for this, but I don't care. Next week will be my final shift at that store, and I'm very thankful I'll never have to be under her management again. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel or posts.